Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with the Rattle Magazine. Welcome to the Rattlecast. We're the biggest freewheeling live stream poetry podcast on the planet, in your ears and on your laptops. Our guest for episode number 333 is Jane Zwart. She'll be here in just a few minutes, but before we get in, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do all this because we love poetry. And you know you do too, so please do click on that like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. You can even go to Rattle.com and leave a donation. We got a donation button at the top. Got a nice one last night, so thanks a lot for that. Now we're going to start out, though, like we always do, with our Poets Respond poet. Tishani Doshi was the poet with another powerful poem about war with a lot of heart. And, of course, that was on the news and what everybody's thinking about and talking about, myself included, right now. And Tishani, it's very early in the morning in India, so she didn't make it up in time. But we're going to share her poem, and you're going to listen to it right now. She says first, though, in her comment, she says, how anyone is meant to hold this kind of heartbreak, and with a link to that tragic bombing of the school in Iran, killing, I think, 160 students. How anyone is meant to hold this kind of heartbreak is unfathomable, is what Tishani says. And here she is reading her poem, War Begins Again.
War begins again. Oh, beautiful, beautiful. This time we will pack a box of soil from home and run. Not to school today, love. The grandmother of Narges had a terrible dream. She caught a firefly in her palms, and in the brief, blunt dark that followed, saw the land prepared with rows of tiny graves. Would you believe me if I said there were no lonely people on balconies before the war, on the war? Everyone we meet says they no longer know who they were before. Not to school today, love. Let us go to the sea instead. Let me comb your hair out with ribbons. We live so close to the body, it's hard to tell who is betraying who. Whether these revolutionary guards are rebelling against the emperor or last night's blood moon, who came with a peaceful heart but now lies bleeding in a tent. It is a mistake to think of nature as indifferent. I hold my ear to the ground, and it is all orchestra and ventricle, shuffle wing, swarm, hidden song, siren. A mother finds a footprint of her dead child in the garden and makes a shrine over it to keep the wind from blowing it away. Oh, beautiful, beautiful. These hands are incapable of building monuments.
And that was Tishani Doshi, once again reading War Begins Again. That was today's poem on Poets Respond. If you have a poem about current events, anything that's happening right now, and whether it's the big stories or little ones, submit your poem that responds to it by midnight every Friday, and we'll publish a poem every Sunday. We've been doing that for over, what is it now? I can't remember, 10 years? Over 10 years? 12 years? Something like that? So do submit your poems and keep poetry relevant, part of the international dialogue. Also, if you want, and if you don't, get a poem by email every day, make sure you sign up at the bottom of any page at rattle.com for our daily poem by email, including those Poets Respond poems on Sunday. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Jane Zwart. So sit tight. We'll be right back with a whole lot more poetry. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Like I said, today's guest is Jane Zwart. Jane teaches literature and writing at Calvin University, where she's also co-directs the Calvin Center for Faith in Writing, which is a really interesting thing we'll try to talk about. Her poems have appeared widely in periodicals, including Poetry, the Poetry Review, Ploughshares, all over good places like that. And her first book, The Oddest and Oldest and Saddest and Best, was just released from Orison Books. She has a new poem out in the current issue of Rattle, which just came out. If you haven't gotten it yet, it's on its way. It slowly makes its way across the country for subscribers, starting from mail in Pennsylvania and sort of trickles out. So it depends how far away you are, but check your mailboxes, subscribers, and you will get that wonderful, beautiful issue any day now if you don't yet, and including Jane's poem. But here she is, Jane Zwart. Hey, Jane, how you doing?
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me. And I want to say I live in Michigan and my copy came today. So that's about how far they are.
Yeah, it's like a wave. And then there's also like random, who knows, like weirdly you'll get one in like Hawaii before anybody else or something. So it's a bit of a mystery, but I'm glad you got your copy. So do you want to start out? We're going to talk a lot more, but do you want to start out reading a poem?
I would love to do that.
Benison is up first.
Yeah, so this is a poem that came out of, I think probably a lot of people have heard about that product called Storyworth that sends you these prompts, these questions, and asks you to write a story. And one of my friends who is in his 70s received that from his kids for Christmas. And he was telling me a little bit about it. And I asked if I could read it. And he got very sheepish about it. And then in the end, he was like, well, if you really want to. And I really did. He is a great storyteller, both on the air and on the page. So this poem is for him. Benison, for those who don't know, means blessing. So used benison. This one is for Dean Ward. Tonight I am borrowing a septuagenarian's life. His lap full of husks and silk, his friend running streetlights. They are rushing ears of sweet corn to boiling water. They are racing sugar's corrosion into starch. I am borrowing everything. The chrysalis a boy set on his dresser for its shape alone. The brief pet it bred. I am sharing a whole record of wonder. The child's an inning into summer. The groom's, his paisley a distraction to the Baptists. The old fellows. If this is life, who could earn their keep? When he throws up his hands, there is a joy that helpless. I borrow it. I too have been loved more than makes sense.
Yeah, it's a beautiful poem to start with too, and it was one of those where I didn't know what benison was, but really the poem unlocks when you realize that. It's a beautiful one. Thanks for sharing that, Jane.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, you've been writing poems for a long time and publishing all over in great places, and yet this is your first book, so I'm really interested to hear what your journey into putting this book together was. Was there something different about like the way you were writing, or how did this book come to be?
Yeah, I have put a number of versions of this book, and most of them pretty similar, out into the world through manuscript contests and open reading periods and things like that. And I felt heartened to get a few finalist nods. Always in the short term, it doesn't feel heartening. In the short term, it feels like, oh, I was so close. But in the longer term, of course, that does feel like an encouragement. It is a lot of people trying, I think, to get through that door, to get their first book published. And I just couldn't get my feet in there. And so at one point at the Festival of Faith and Writing, which is what the Center for Faith and Writing has as its signature event, and which you mentioned, I was talking with Christian Wyman and his wife, Danielle Chapman, both of whom are writers that I admire a great deal. We were having lunch, and very kindly, Chris said, "So when's your first book coming out?" And I said, "Hopefully not posthumously." And he laughed and then really kindly offered to look at a sheaf of poems and see if there was a book in there. And so I sent him a sheaf of poems, and he was like, nope, this doesn't belong. These two need to go next to each other, and just gave me some really helpful advice about that. And then I sent it off to Orison Books. It looked different than it had before. And Luke Hankins there got back to me surprisingly quickly, especially having gone through in the interim Hurricane Helene. So when he called me, he was like, yes, I am at the public library because I have no electricity or water. Which I was like, you could have waited. But I was so grateful and so delighted, and I still am. I can't talk about it without feeling just really knowing how lucky this is. So yeah, that's how it happened.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's such a journey for some for books, really, and you know, there's so many people trying to publish books, and there are a lot of publishers, but not nearly enough, given how many books there are. What were the differences if you could characterize the changes that were made in those
Mhm.
edits? What do the poems that were dropped have in common versus the ones that remained?
I think the ones that were dropped, I think I put them in originally because I felt like they were good poems, that they were strong poems. But I think a number of them sort of distracted from the themes of the book, or a few of them, I think, repeated
Hmm.
themes of the book in ways that were too close to each other. So yeah, I think what I needed, and I've had other people give me good advice on this front. But Chris was in a wonderful way, just really merciless. I think what I needed is someone to be like, no, you love that one and you are allowed to love that one and it doesn't belong there. Or to say between these two, you need to pick one because they're both doing the same work. So I think a lot of it was about efficiency and tightening things up. Then I also did send some alternates to Luke Hankins. I was like, if there are any in here that you don't think fit or that you just don't think are particularly wonderful, we can swap some out. I'm happy to do that. So we did a little bit of that. And he also told me, yeah, this is not a four-part book. This is a three-part book. And I think I wanted it to be in four parts, partly because of the title and the symmetry there. But of course, the parts aren't aligned to oddest and oldest and saddest and best. So I think it does make more sense in three parts. But really, yeah, I mean, this is why we need to do this work with other people, and why we need to be able to come back to our own stuff ourselves. I think
Hmm.
not just as the person who wrote the thing, but as someone who's turned back into a reader a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's great. I think inspiring for people, who are struggling because so many people have manuscripts that they're trying to get out there, and with all the great credits and stuff, you had of being published all over and writing so many reviews and interviews, which we'll talk about later too. It's hard for everybody, hard for me too to get stuff out. So, yeah, I think that's really inspiring. Do you want to read another poem? On beauty and being just is the next one.
Yeah, I'd love to. Um, So this is a poem that I stole the title of. The title came after the poem. I wasn't sure what to name it. It's the title of a book by Elaine Scarry, which is much more a book of sort of aesthetics and philosophy. But it came from my sort of thinking about how many of the things that I think of as the most showy beauties, I give short shrift to. And I think that's probably because if I have any aspirations, to be beautiful myself, it's going to be a real low maintenance soap and water kind of good looking. So the poem, as you said, is called On Beauty and Being Just. It is possible I have been unfair to them, the flamboyants, to opals, to abalones, to moths, more phosphorescent than any eyeshadow I've worn. Because who knows? Maybe the painted bunting would willingly trade his layered paint by number capes for the robin's rusty apron. Maybe the hibiscus isn't a satellite dish, tilting on its own stem to overhear the praise of passersby, but an umbrella mortified that day has left it open in a narrow place to dry. Maybe the northern lights' magic is static, escaped photons from the cupped palm of a modest earth smoothing her skirt. But there too, I have been unjust, asking the bird to disavow his jaunty beauty, rose mallow to flower rue, wanting to be fair. Let me trade it for plain delight. Let me quit shaming the flame-like things, or, at least, let the wind unwinding its argon sarong not mind the likes of me.
Yeah, so that was once again on beauty and being just from Jane's new book, Oddest, Oldest, and Saddest and Best. And you can see some of the themes emerging in those first two poems already, which is, I think, noticing the magic and spirituality of every day of our surroundings, and sort of attention maybe is at the heart of the book. And that always makes me curious about how you approach poetry as part of your life. It feels like one of the things poetry can do is be a tool for that noticing, which both enriches and sort of enlightens and also makes us see the bigger picture too, in a way. So there's such value in that. And I'm just wondering how you feel about that aspect of being a writer.
Yeah, I think I actually wrote maybe a little bit about this in the bio for the new issue of Rattle. And one of the things that I love about Rattle is reading everyone's bios, because it's not the usual, like, I published here and here kind of credits. I'm not saying that doesn't have its place, but it's nice to read people talking about why they write and why they wrote the specific poem they wrote. And I think for me, one of the big reasons that I write and that I read poetry is to refine that kind of noticing, because I feel like there are so many things that would just sort of go by really quickly with the current if I didn't have a means of slowing things down and plucking them out sometimes and paying attention before giving them back to the sort of rush of things. And so I think those two, you're right, are poems that are sort of trying to do that. I think in other places, and we'll come to some of these too, I think in other places, I'm not adjusting my grip to hold on to something more tightly that I would otherwise miss. I think I'm adjusting my grip to sort of open myself to possibilities that seem scary to me or worrying or uncomfortable. Um, so yeah, and that's something again that poetry has given me a lot of, both as someone who writes it, but also as a reader. I think it's been a huge part of my training and just paying attention.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue to the next poem, I think. Go Back to Your Own Country.
Yeah. So before I read this one, I want to tell you where the title came from and how very nervous it made me to write a poem with this title. Because, of course, usually those words, go back to your own country, are used in ways that are bigoted and cruel and xenophobic. But I'm friends with a poet that I know that you've published, Amit Majmudar. And every once in a while, and I do this thing that he calls mirror writing, where we take turns choosing titles, and then each of us writes a poem for the title, and then shows it to the other person. And then the next day, we do it again, and the other person chooses a title. And we do that, sometimes for a stretch of a week or so. I think especially for both of us, just when we're like, okay, I need to kind of get back in the momentum of this thing. And obviously, yeah, some of them you are happier with than others. But this was a title that Amit gave me, and I was like, oh, what are you doing to me? But it turned out okay, I think. So it's called Go Back to Your Own Country. Let me tell you about countries. Nobody has their own, and where we come from moves. Our mothers' wombs aren't where we left them. Continents calve. Jerusalem holds a tray full of glasses that a scrum of men take and put back, take and put back, unworried for the weight she must shift. Let me tell you, some of our countries aren't where we left them. Someone pulls a string and six tumble from Yugoslavia's pocket. Someone halves Sudan like a branch over their knee. Someone crumbles a Bailey between Berlins, and Germany is one place again. Only Adam had his own country, and he could not go back. A country is land that's learned to disown.
Yeah, really interesting ending to that one. That was Go Back to Your Own Country, again from Jane's newest book, Oddest and Oldest and Saddest and Best. You've already mentioned these three poems coming from sort of prompts of a kind, and I'm always really interested in that because I love, and as you might know, watching the show, I love prompts, and we do the prompt lines with Katie after the second half of every episode, because prompts, when you start somewhere that you don't have a preconception for, it lets you wander in a surprising direction. And so is that something that it's just a coincidence that these first three poems have that kind of background, or do you write from prompts all the time? And what's your experience of that versus not writing from prompts,
Yeah, I think for a long time I did not write from prompts, and I wrote a lot fewer poems. And part of that was that I had little kids at the time, and even as they are in all sorts of ways, walking little poem machines themselves, there was plenty to do without kind of seeking out poems that I didn't feel the urgency to write right then, right? I would write those, the ones that sort of came to me as if from the stork, just like the children. And I was like, oh, I have to pay attention to this now. And I need to try and figure out a way to wrestle this into words now, or I'm going to lose whatever it is. And so, yeah, for a very long time, I just was like, well, if it comes to me, I'll write it. And then actually that mirror writing with Amit was the first time I have sort of written to an assignment. And yeah, it started when on the old Twitter, rest in peace, I saw this beautiful, beautiful painting of an angel by Jesus' tomb. And the angel looked so tired, like she had darkness under her eyes, but she was still really beautiful. And I retweeted it and said, I've just decided I prefer my angels sleep deprived. And Amit wrote back and said, poetry prompt, the sleep deprived seraph. And then maybe an hour, maybe two later, into my mailbox came a poem called The Sleep Deprived Seraph that he had written that quickly, which was beautiful and is an astonishing and freakish thing to be able to do. But it ended with him saying, your turn. I was like, oh, no. I don't do that. But then, because it was just like such a brotherly dare on some level, I was like, well, I'll try it. I don't have to send it to him if it's terrible. And it wasn't terrible. I mean, it wasn't wonderful, but it wasn't terrible. And so we went back and forth like that the first time for 30 days, half of a September and half of an October. And yeah, it unlocked something for me where I realized that, yeah, some poems are sort of gifts. They're parachuted almost into your lap. And most poems are kind of shapes or outlines that you need to figure out how to fill in. And that some of those you would never get to by any other means, right? Like you're
Mhm.
saying, when you wander, there are things you discover. And not all of them worthy of being in a poem. But it sure did open something up for me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a way that the poetry is more a process than a product or a craft or anything. I mean, it's like
Hmm.
it's a tool of being in a certain state where stuff happens, and then it's
Yep.
the record of the state you were in while you were writing it, I guess. And
Hmm.
sometimes those are really interesting to to share and explore, and sometimes they're not. But either way, like the process of that is so important. And there always seems to be something so spiritual about poetry because of that. And I don't know
Hmm.
how, where it aligns with your faith, given that, working at the Center for Faith and Writing, if I remember that right. And,
You do.
but to me, like I don't go to church. I think there's a greater mystery out there that's just fascinating that we don't understand about reality in some way. And poetry is one of the few ways to like get at that mystery, So
Mhm.
to me, it is extremely spiritual. It's like the real
Mhm.
locus of some kind of honest spirituality that I could have. And I'm wondering how you position yourself within that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my theology, and in my sort of religious practice, I would say very much part of a Christian tradition and a Christian set of core beliefs. Um, but when you talk about that mystery, and when you talk about that thing that is bigger than any of us, that does strike me as one way of understanding the word that a lot of people usually use, which is God. And I think, yeah, not all of my poems go to a place that, has a saint in it or has some sort of resonance that's borrowed from the hymns of my growing up or has a biblical allusion, although I did sneak Adam in there at the end of this one. But I think all of them I consider, whether it's, a shape I need to fill in or something that arrives, I think they all come from a song that I can only sort of half hear,
Hmm.
right? And so it's all borrowed music in some way. Um, and yeah, I'm so grateful for that source of creativity and the way in which, yeah, because whatever, whoever, I would say, because the God that made the universe is creative, that turned out to be catching.
Hmm.
And so we're creative too.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. Do you think poetry, with religious rates falling as they have been for, around the world for, I don't know, 50, 75 years or so, um, do you think poetry can be a replacement for that? Like a new kind of
Mm.
spirituality, like a connection? Because there's so many people that long, like, there's so much we don't talk about. And one of the main things that come up in Rattle all the time is that there's certain like taboo subjects that we don't think of as taboo, but they're just stuff that we don't really address on a deep level. And a lot of it is because we don't have the background of going to church where we talk about things like life and death. And so there's these big mysteries, and they end up being things that we don't analyze deeply. And poetry really is a way to connect with those things that we don't, it's like that if you meet somebody at the playground, I think you have this like surface conversation for a while, and then eventually sometimes you get into a really deep thing with a stranger, and that's kind of what poetry is, which is what I love about it.
Yeah.
Do you think that can be a replacement for faith, or do you think faith people need more than just that?
I guess there's a couple things I would say to that good and very hard question. And one of them is that I would want it to be a route to something that poetry is a small part of. I'd want that for me. I would want that for other people too. I feel like there is a danger if it's a replacement of being too sort of focused on ourselves and the immediacy of our own lives and needs and wants, and to stop sort of paying attention there. And thus not to realize that sort of all of these things that we make in poems and that we manage to say in poems, that it's always an approximation, right? That, I mean, I love that line. I think it's from As I Lay Dying, where Addie Bundren says, words don't ever get what they're saying at. Right. And I think that's true. Like, I think of poetry in all language as provisional, like this gift, this provision for us, and also as provisional, like it doesn't quite take us the whole way.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, I don't, reading the Bible, I feel that provisionality of language. There's all sorts of places where the human beings that made that text were inspired by God in such a way that they were like, okay, a metaphor is as close as I'm going to be able to get here, right? And they were right. There's this approximation, I think. Um, but that said, I wanted poetry to be a provision for people of faith and for people who are not seeking a bigger sort of organizing understanding of things in faith. And I guess one of the things that I come back to as a Christian is this belief that we all exist in the hand of God, and that you don't need to know that or consent to it for it to be true.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. I love the idea of it being a provision poetry. A great way to think of it. We did a Poets of Faith issue back in, I don't know when that was, 2012 maybe, or 13.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a surprising amount. There's pushback on a lot of issues. Like, people get really contentious about things. I was very surprised at how much there was with the Poets of Faith issue. Like, people were upset that we were just talking about faith that openly, and people were to the point where we had a whole bunch of like anti-religious poems and regular submissions, and the next issue had sort of this secret theme of like, and so we decided for the cover, we got this submission. It's issue number 50. We got this submission of the Virgin Mary is like an alien. I think it was the cover. And so we decided to go with the cover because it was like this,
I'm going to go back,
hidden theme in the issue kind of. But I'm wondering if you experienced that at all. Like, what is your experience with faith and writing in that nexus at the Center for Faith and Writing? Because it is, I don't know. I mean, I want poetry to be all over the place because it's so valuable in so many ways, and a lot of it like psychological and emotional, and the attention that we were talking about before. And one of the places that contemporary poetry could find more readership, I think, is the faith communities. So it's really interesting to hear that work you're doing. I'm curious to learn more about it.
Yeah. So the Center for Faith and Writing came into being in 2016, but for a very long time before that, going back to 1990, Calvin University, where I work, had something that came to be called the Festival of Faith and Writing. And the thing that I really love about the Festival of Faith and Writing is how much of a big tent it is. And so we have had people from all sorts of religious traditions. We have had writers who are Christian. We have had writers who are Jewish, who are Muslim, who are Hindu. We have had Christians from those traditions who have this sort of either background in one of those traditions and also a sort of refusal of it and a turning away from it because of the ways that it has failed them, either intellectually or in a faith community. And I think one of the things that is really a gift about that community is, of course, there's always pushback, right? Anything you do, there will be pushback. But it's pushback that is questioning and listening. And so the writers we have told us over and over again that they've gotten such, when they've spoken, when they've been interviewed, they've gotten such challenging questions, but questions that are asked from a place of really wanting to hear the answer. And questions that maybe are asked from a place of conviction on the interviewer's part or the festival goer's part, but not the kind of conviction that sort of precludes being able to learn something new, or that precludes curiosity. And for me, that's a model for how I hope I'm able to move through the world too.
Yeah. Well, that curiosity is so important, and especially shows in the poems, which we should get back to. So let's read another one. I Drive to Prison is the next one up.
Yes. So this is actually also a Calvin University adjacent poem, because one of the things that I get to do, and it is actually my very favorite part of my job, is in the summer I teach as part of the Calvin Prison Initiative. So there's a prison about 45 minutes away, maybe, in Ionia, where students who are currently incarcerated are earning bachelor's degrees without any cost to them. And I get to teach them some literature. And this past summer, I got to teach them a class called Reading and Writing Poetry. And I have never had a group of students that is at once so skeptical and so eager. It was just one of the best experiences that I've had, both with poems and with teaching and students and learning from my students. So this is about driving out there. It's called I Drive to Prison. I drive to prison, where the tallest man in class speaks of children who trip and stand up unhurt and do not cry until they see broken skin, carnelian, a trickle shaped like a run in a stocking. He says, we're like that still, that there is a sickness a man can catch, just catching his likeness in a glass. Down my street lives a salesman whose wife died. Once a week, he putters past on his Vespa, a grandson braced between his knees. For months, the kid would not loose the handlebars to wave. Sometimes beauty lets you forget yourself. I drive to prison early. At that hour, day can hardly see over earth's shoulder. At that hour, vapor, stone flies, airbrushing the river's patchy complexion, brown shapes grazing. But I meant to tell you about a place where the road curves and I, following, steer toward brilliance. I know the wish is foolish. I wish I could drive my student to this bend in the route. I take east, to the spot where a rampart of forest absorbs the sun's first blows, where the trees cannot swallow the shining in time. He would stretch one long arm out the window, I think, and no longer shy of the car's side mirrors, he would, no less than the oaks, conquered by light, forget himself and be anointed.
And that was oh, I lost. I lost track. That was I Drive to Prison.
It was, yep.
Yeah, from Oddest and Oldest and Saddest and Best by Jane Zwart. And the next poem we're going to read, Jane, is the title poem. And I'm curious, because that title, so many of your titles are so interesting. It's one of the highlights of the collection, I think, is turning the page and seeing what the next title is going to be. It's always a surprise. It's always complicated. And that title it suggests a kind of complication. It's all those things simultaneously, which are sort of contradictory. And I'm wondering how much, because it's always so interesting when we choose a title for our book. It both... Like, it's a poem that fits, but I always find it finds a way of like letting us know how the poems fit together too. And I'm curious, like, what you learned about your own writing in this collection from picking that title and how that became the choice too.
Yeah. So This collection has been called lots of things in different iterations. One of the names that I had for it for a while was Fourfold Amen, which is another of the poems that is in the collection. One of the names I had for it for a while is from a poem that I took out because it was doing too much of a similar thing to another poem, which that poem was called Where It Ends and Where It Doesn't. But I landed eventually on Oddest and Oldest and Saddest and Best. Um, Partly because I thought this captures the sort of manyness of what this little collection wants to contain and what I want to care about. The cover, I'll hold it up if that's okay, is a Joseph Cornell. And it's all of these little cubbies in basically a diorama. He made these beautiful boxes and dioramas, and most of them are not cubbied like this. But I was so excited when one, I found this image. I love Cornell anyway. And two, when Luke at Orison was like, yes, we can get permission for that. Because I feel like these sort of little things that I want to pay attention to and want to give a sort of place of honor to, and that don't quite fit together all the time, except that they're all held together in proximity, and then they start sort of pinging around and being in conversation with each other. I felt like Oddest and Oldest and Saddest and Best doesn't necessarily in an orderly way name the contents of the book, but it names the sort of sensibility of the book. What I did not think about is how long that takes to say every time someone says, "What is your book called?" So I apologize because during this podcast, you're really having your own special time with that. Um, and yeah, like it also, I think at the end, like it takes a turn to get a little braggier than I intended it to end with and best. Sounds like real sort of self-promotion. So did not mean for that.
Well, I think it's a
Yeah.
great title. I have to say, it's
Well,
it's
thank
you
you.
got to remember the order of them, which is a little tricky to be saying off the cuff. But I think it's a really cool and memorable title.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So shall I read that poem?
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Oddest and oldest and saddest and best. My student spends his summers in city cemeteries, clipping the scruff that grows too close to the stones, or anywhere the mowers can't go. Sundays mostly, the death jilted come, some to pledge the stiff with a fifth, some to Windex the pane of granite. Some of those left come to sob nearer the lever, or anyway, nearer the dregs that pool in their defector's chest. Sundays, my student stays home. Mondays, he finds the flat and shouldered bottles. He finds a silver pita barely levitating in the cool of the day, bleeding helium molecules. The remnant, trapped in the mylar, huddles small for warmth. He finds that those who visit the hours he works don't mind the loose orbit the groundskeepers keep around their mellowed grief. He tells me about the priest who lingers after giving a graveside homily, heavy on Jonah. The Lord appoints the bush and the worm that attacks the bush. Some of the bereaved, my student says, regain their curiosity. They ask him about the others' epitaphs, oddest and oldest, and saddest and best.
Yeah, yeah. Very cool. The sort of the way you don't know where the title is going to go. You know what that's going to mean until the very end, and then the whole collection too. It's a really nice, mixing of everything together in one moment. You notice too in that poem, in all the poems you've read so far too, the really rich detail that you use in your work. I mean, there's the dregs that pool in their defector's chest. Then you've got the helium molecules and the mylar huddles, small for warmth. There's such a richness. It's not the simple basic words you use. You're pulling up really, detailed, complicated descriptions of things. And I'm curious how your writing process works with that. How do you, are details something that sort of you add and build? I was watching, we were visiting Rena Espaillat, who we mentioned before we were talking over the weekend. And her husband, Alfred, was a sculptor. And he has all these like figures that he does. And we didn't realize until we went and saw the studio in their basement with all the wires and things, that it's like these wires of figures he makes and then heaps the clay on top of that. And sometimes I wonder if like poetry can be like that sometimes, where you're like adding details and moving it around and building out. Whereas a lot of things, I think the way I write personally is a lot more of like carving away, So there's that like chiseling until you have what's left versus like adding. And when I come across poems like this, it makes me think that maybe that's more the process like Alfred Moskowitz was using in his sculptures. What do you think? Like, what's your process like?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I do both of those things in different stages, probably. And the first stage is definitely the sort of stage of accumulation and of building up. And I think that's because one of the things I do when I need to describe something is I just try to see it in as many ways as I can. And one of the ways is to pay attention to the very tiny details. And then one of the other ways is through sort of associative thinking, to figure out what something reminds me of. So a mylar balloon that's looking a little worse for the wear in the weather, like it kind of looks like a silver pita. But then, yeah, also leaving sort of room, I hope, for myself after I've like let all those excesses sort of build up to figure out what gets to stay and what doesn't. Because I think, yeah, if I would allow myself to really just, run amok, well, not angrily, but allow myself to really just, keep going and going, I think I have this weakness for wanting things sometimes to be beautiful more than wanting things to be accessible. And I think the poetry that I enjoy reading most and the poetry that I am trying the hardest to write is a poetry that has figured out how to balance those things so that it has some of the gifts of accessibility and it has some of the gifts of complication and abundance. And that's a hard thing to figure out. And it's another reason that, I need other readers, because I need my husband person to be like, wow, you lost me there, right? Because then I know that either it needs more mile markers and a clearer path, or maybe it just needs to go. So there's less of a hurdle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool description of that. Well, at this point, I should say, if you're enjoying this conversation, make sure you click the like button if you haven't yet. There's already a lot more people who are watching live than have clicked the like across all the platforms. It really helps a lot. Poetry spread after the fact. So click the like right now if you haven't yet. And if you have any questions for Jane, leave them in the chat window, especially on YouTube. I'll glance at Facebook too sometimes, but YouTube's the main chat that's great. So leave any questions in the chat window. If you have any questions, I'll pass them along. Let's hear another poem, Jane. The next one we had was Shroud.
All right. Yeah, so a little classical allusion in this one, to Odysseus and his wife Penelope, who keeps weaving this garment, promises to choose someone as her next suitor, and then unweaves it at night so that she can stave off having to make that choice. But also, this is a poem, that does have a backstory and it has an after story. And really, the after story is what I want to name, which is I wrote this when I had to have a biopsy. And when I was having all of the sort of worries and feelings that go along with that for a lot of us. And so I wanted to say, just so, no one is like, oh no, that it is a thing of great grace that came back negative, that yeah, I am, a little creaky because getting up there. But also, yeah, really well. So this poem is called Shroud. In the old poem, a woman unravels at night what she weaves by day. A beautiful conceit, even if mostly things just undo themselves. A day before the biopsy, my therapist asks me to tell a story about the next day. So I close my eyes and imagine rising, rousing my sons. Is it nexterday? One used to ask, meaning tomorrow. I say, here is the list of Wednesday extras: trumpet, singlet. I say, I will badger their shoes on, singing today. And if next I wave down the car and kiss my boys' palms, they won't think today we might come home to bad news, because I am always like this, every day, the same harried love. But also, in this poem, a woman unravels at night.
And that was Shroud, from Jane's new book. We mentioned earlier about all the reviews you write and interviews you do. It's something that really, people would call you, I've heard, a good literary citizen.
Good.
And it is. So can you explain a little bit about that? Because it is such an important thing that I think is really neglected. There aren't enough reviews, especially serious reviews, that really dig into giving an honest response to poems or collections. And we had reviews in Rattle for a long time. I can't remember if we published reviews of yours back when we did or not.
No, but I remember them.
Yeah, they were online, and I just they started feeling like, so, I don't know, friends writing for friends to promote friends. It was so hard to filter that out. And I got so tired of it that I just pulled the plug. and but it is such an important thing to be doing. If poetry matters, we have to take it seriously, and that means talking seriously about it. So is that why you approach reviewing, and how do you approach reviewing?
Yeah, so I was at AWP last weekend, and I was talking to someone that you've had her a couple times, I think, Erin C. Murphy, on Rattlecast, and we were talking about reviews because she writes them too. And I was asking her sort of, what her ethics of how well she can know the person whose book she's reviewing is. Because for a long time, that wasn't an issue for me at all. This was my first AWP. I didn't go through an MFA program. I hardly knew anyone. And, working with the Center for Faith and Writing, and then kind of making some connections with people online, you do start to know people, and you don't want the reason you're writing a review to be sort of a favor or a quid pro quo. And at the same time, there is probably an etiquette to the thing where if you are receiving the sort of support and encouragement and kindness and generosity of other people, you should be spending some of your own kindness and generosity and support and encouragement. So the thing that I try to do is there are so many people that are doing this work, right? At the beginning, we talked about how it took me forever to get my foot in the door. And so, yeah, I mean, the books I review, those writers have obviously already gotten their foot in the door. Um, but I try to review books that I want to see keep traveling farther. I review books that I feel like are books maybe partly that I needed to find, but also that I think other people will need to find. And I try as much as I can not to let those books be of people that I am really tight with. So I feel like, it's kind of like Tupperware karma, right? Like you can't hoard it all and just keep it all. You have to keep passing it around, but it doesn't need to go back to the person that gave you a meal in the Tupperware, right? And probably there are people who, if they heard me say that, would be like, I want my Tupperware back, not somebody else's Tupperware. And that's fine. But I do feel like, yeah, it's a whole ecosystem. And that's part of the reason I write reviews. But part of the reason is I love writing reviews. I love spending that kind of time trying to figure out sort of the um, echoes and the tensions and the questions and the real sort of quiet connections and themes in somebody else's book. It's helped me think about how books are put together. It's helped me think about how to put my book together. But I also love spending time with other people's words because when it comes to attention and when it comes to noticing, they notice different things than I do a lot of the time. And it makes, in some ways, it makes the world more precious to me to be able to see more of it, even if it's secondhand. So, yeah, those are my reasons. And one of my reasons too is that I'm with Timothy Liu, one of the book review editors for Plume. So I have definitely, hitched my wagon to the reviewing star. But I'm really happy I've done so.
Yeah, definitely. So how do you approach the review itself? Because there is this there's sort of mindset that's maybe the dominant mindset that art and poetry have so much subjectivity that, everything is just an opinion and everything is valuable, and so there's no, and then the objective side, becomes like this elitist thing where, who has the right to say anything is good or bad? There's that whole mindset and mentality. And that's one of the things that makes reviewing really hard too. So how do you confront that problem, the subjectivity problem?
Yeah. So, part of the way I confront it is to begin by just trying to understand what the poems are up to and what the book is up to. And if in doing that, I'm like, I do not have enough good things to say about this book. Like that partly I do think is probably firmly in the realm of subjectivity. There are all sorts of poems that I think are worthwhile poems and they're beautifully crafted and they just are not ones that I like. And so if I pick up a book that has a lot of those, then I'm not going to write about it because I don't feel like my, saying that is really doing any good. I'm not trying to steer anyone away from anything. I'm not trying to gatekeep or be like, oh, I get to be the arbiter of what's worthwhile. I want to say what I find worthwhile in the books that I read and what I hope other people might. So I always, first I read the book straight through and there's, little marginalia and dog-eared and all of the mess. And then I read it again slower to kind of see more clearly what I think the pieces are up to, not just what the trajectory is. And then, I start with something that I really love and try to connect it to other things that I think are important. But for me, I think part of the reason that I feel okay about the subjectivity involved is because I let it guide what I write about. So I'm not taking anyone down because I just don't really see the worth in doing that, which is not to say you shouldn't be able to tell the truth about what you think is good and what you don't. But there's so many people saying what they don't think is good in so many venues. And I just feel like that's going to keep chugging along just fine without me. And then I think, yeah, I approach it partly like I would approach a book I'm teaching. I want to learn from it. And I want to set other people up to learn from it if they want to learn from it too. So a lot of it is sort of analysis and interpretation and trying to find the questions it's asking so that I can share those with other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well said too. And I'm wondering if you had to pick, doing so many interviews, writing so many reviews, if there was one thing that you learned from that you applied to your own book, could you think of something that was the best lesson from all that work you've done?
I think the first best lesson, and luckily it wasn't the only lesson, but I think the first best lesson was that I did not know how to structure a book of poems, right? Like I knew how to write a stack of poems. I wrote a big stack of them. But a lot of what I realized is that there are all of these sort of structures and intricacies, and it's not just that a book of poems is like the mixtapes that I used to make for my friends in the 90s, right? Where you try to have enough variety and maybe a little like, ooh, little shout out to the thing before or whatever, that there is far more to it than that, and that I didn't know how to do it yet. I think in the longer term, doing so many of these reviews, I begin to see sort of some of the ways that those big structures, and you can play in the details, work. So thinking about some books are telling a story, and you always get to choose what order you tell it in. But I realized how sort of not necessarily within individual poems, although sometimes that, but how narrative a book of poetry can be. And I began to see what kinds of poems like to cluster together, and that sort of work of juxtaposition, and where something became sort of too lulling, the need for something to break the pattern. So I do feel like slowly, and incompletely, I've learned a lot about the structure of a book of poems that works as a book, not just a pile of nice poems on papers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, good advice for sure. We've got 2 poems left. Let's read Jumper, then we'll do the questions from the audience. Do you read that?
Okay. So the background to this poem is that I am a terrible jumper. Like I cannot hardly get any air at all, and that my sons and my husband think this is hilarious. And if I have to like duck to go under a low door, they will say things like, well, maybe it would work better if you jumped, right? Because that is how bad I am at jumping. I get shorter when I do it. So that is the background for this poem, which is not nearly as funny as my husband and sons, but nonetheless, here we go. Jumper. Mostly I applaud, and jealousy is a splinter in my hand. Not that I would call it an affliction. Not that, if pressed, I wouldn't admit the words jealousy and splinter. Both run wide. Nothing stings after all. During the ovation for the actor who makes me wipe my eyes, an eyelash-sized envy. For the painter, a green bristle from a horsehair brush. Maybe this too can be explained. Maybe the whisker of our own talent is what itches when we clap. Never, after all, have my palms tingled, cheering the jumper. The girls who make high dives, lamellophones, the shooting guard peddling thin air over the key. I laud them empty-handed and flat-footed, the same as any witness to unattainable grace.
Yeah, so that was Jumper, and you got to love it when lamellophones appear in a poem. That's one of those really cool details that so common in your work. Jumper by James Zwart. And let's see. So over on the chat, let me find. Oop, it jumped. I gotta find the question again. Let's see. Where was Shiv's? Oh yeah. So Shiv Preet Singh had a question here. Do you think amazement comes from seeing the ordinary world differently or from encountering something truly unexpected?
Um, this is sort of a cheat answer, but I think it probably comes from both. Um, I think seeing something truly unexpected, there are things that are just spectacular and that leave you awestruck and you have no choice in the matter. So I think seeing something truly unexpected, that kind of wonder or that kind of amazement, it's involuntary. I think the kind of wonder that you can feel if you pay attention to a very small thing, a dead katydid on a sidewalk, or the way that a peach, when you cut it, looks in your hand, right? I think those things, the wonderment is rarely involuntary. I think we have to cultivate it. I think we have to practice it. So I think both things are true, but I think they take sort of, in the one case, work, and you need to make an openness to amazement and a seeking for amazement a habit. And in the other case, you don't need to worry about it because it's going to do you in whether you want it to or not.
Yeah, definitely. And here's another totally different topic from Thomas Mixon. He says, Jane just said that she didn't come through an MFA program. She spoke so candidly at the start about the book publication process that I'd like to hear more on this. I don't have an MFA. So.
Yeah. So I think for one thing, when I started grad school and I went and did a PhD in literature, the main thing that I was thinking about was what I needed it for. And I knew I needed it to teach, and I knew I wanted to teach. And it's not that I wasn't interested in the research and in the many things that I would learn, but I knew I didn't want to teach high school because I was pretty sure I didn't have the calluses for that. And that is not to say that I don't think, I mean, my own high school teachers are part of the reason that my whole life with words has unfolded the way it has, both as a reader and a writer. Um, but I knew that that was not going to be something that I would be able to easily do. And I like the tricky bits and the complicated bits. And in high school, of a necessity, you have to lay a lot of groundwork before you get there, and you have less time to get there. And teaching college, I knew I would have more time to get there because my students would be readier when they came in. So all that to say, the reason I didn't do an MFA wasn't because I thought maybe I should do an MFA, but I chose something else. I was just like, yes, I want to teach literature, so I will go do the thing I need to do to teach literature. And I was at Boston University, and they have an MFA. So I did get to take a class, and it was a literature class, but with Hajin. I did once run into Derek Walcott in the elevator. Um, but that was sort of the first time I was like, oh, I wonder what would have happened if I'd done an MFA. Um, I think partly for me, I hadn't yet learned to write to fill in an outline, right? I thought that poems were sort of rare things that would occasionally find you. And I think maybe I was a little precious about thinking about them as work or craft. So that's why I didn't do an MFA, and I'm not speaking against them at all. I think there's a lot of learning to be done there. I think there's a lot of good connections to make there. I think if you do not go that route, in some ways, in terms of your literary community and in terms of finding the people that you know have something to teach you about your voice and what you want to do with it, it's harder to find. It takes longer, usually, unless you're really extroverted and enterprising, and I'm not either thing. So that all took longer for me. I published my first collection. It came out just barely when I was 48. And, that is not a new person. But I feel like there have been so many things that have layered into my poetry. And some of them, if I hadn't found them, I would have so few poems, I wouldn't be able to make a book, right? And that comes from that poetic community. But
Mhm.
some of them, regardless, I would have just been smitten with language and how weird it is and what it can do and what can't do. And I think too, yeah, so much of sort of that paying attention that the last question asked about, I'll connect them. So much of that paying attention is something that I have learned extra and more deeply because I had kids. And to kids, everything is new. Their wonder is involuntary in a way that an adult's isn't for quite a long time. And if you pay attention to them paying attention, whew, you can learn a lot from that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So did you know that you wanted to be a poet, or was that, or did you know more that you wanted to
Yeah.
be in literature, and poetry came later?
I knew that I wanted to be a poet. I've been writing poems since I was a pretty little kid. Both my parents were English majors. They kept their textbooks that they bought in college. So it was a weird hodgepodge for sure. Little Shakespeare, little Langston Hughes, little Emily Dickinson. But I still remember pulling those down and being like, "Can I look at this?" And my mom being like, "Yeah, sure." And just reading sort of random pages and being like, "Huh, this is doing something really interesting that I do not yet understand." And at the same time, like I feel this sort of chiming inside me with it, right? And so then I started writing really bad poems, which is the kind of poems you write when you're in sixth grade, with very few exceptions. But yeah, I did have it set up as sort of this mystical process, or mystical non-process. And so yeah, I think in large part, when it was time for me to figure out what to do with like my post-college life, I had worked on the literary magazine and I wrote poems, but I had a lot more confidence in my ability to teach literature than I did in my ability to write poems.
Mhm.
Um, I should also say, like, one of those jobs is a lot more lucrative than the other, which is not to say that it's like super lucrative, but you can make a very happy, comfortable life being a college professor if you're lucky enough to get a job. And that is true of very, very few poets.
Mhm.
But in my 20s, I wasn't making a lot of economic judgments, which, some of us are, but a lot of us aren't.
Yeah, yeah. Well, congratulations on that journey and having this book out. Do
Thanks.
you want to close out with YMCA?
I do. Yeah. So, one of the things I'll say is I grew up in Grand Rapids. When I moved back for the job at Calvin, one of the things that I loved the most and that made me feel the best about being back in Grand Rapids was the downtown David D. Hunting YMCA, because it was so wonderfully various in terms of all these people who felt like it was their spot. And it wasn't my spot yet because I'd only gone a few times, but I loved how there were young people and old people and how there were people of all sorts of ethnic and cultural backgrounds and socioeconomic status. And it just felt like, yeah, the very motley thing that I had been worried that I wouldn't be able to find in this small city. So this poem comes a little bit from that. YMCA. The man who sells us pizza moonlights here, lambasting women on stationary bikes up imaginary hills. His class, my friend says, always fills. There's something touching about this, a man's unwanted flair for browbeating, transformed into an asset at last. I know some misery finds the why too. A beginner folded in a Gia's starch cries, Round kids and rangy kids climb out of the pool in tees that cling, a second skin, more conspicuous than skin. Outside the tiny door to a racquetball court, an EMT, a wheeled cot. But it is easy, scoured by these borrowed towels, to love the others. In chair yoga, the old throw their arms slowly open. A teenager teaches a child to swim. The lifters take turns standing over each other, heaviness between them. And the girl whose parents made her come, who finds a treadmill among the stalwart walkers and the distance runners ice has forced indoors, who plugs her headphones into the TV and leans on the machine, ass against guardrail, eating Cheetos, never even shuffling her feet. Her I might love most of all.
Yes, that was YMCA. Great ending on that poem. Great way to end the segment. Thanks so much for being a guest today, Jane. Really a pleasure getting to know you better and sharing this book. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for all the amazing things that you and Rattle do. I know there are even more than I know of.
Well, definitely my pleasure. Thanks again, Jane. That was Jane Zwart. You can find her newest book, which just came out, Oddest and Oldest and Saddest and Best, from Orison Books. Find all at janezwart.com. That's Jane, Jane, Zwart, ZWART.com. Find her book there, all the other work she does too. So do check that out. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to the invited prompt lines. And the prompt for this week was to write a poem which confesses something that's secretly seasonal to you, but not so much to others. We've got folks trickling in already for the prompt. Now, unfortunately, Katie is not going to be here today. It's a rare. She's got a kid event came up, and we couldn't really find a way to wiggle out of it. So Katie's over there. It's going to be just me flying solo. Not nearly as fun, but I'll do my best. But we've got your invited prompt lines. So if you have a poem about that, so you submitted it by midnight last night. Katie picked about 10 people, balancing for length and topic and having new faces mixing with the old. So that's what we're going to do coming up in just a moment. So if you sent one in, make sure you check your email and see how that went. And join us on the Zoom right now if you have the link. And we'll be back with a whole lot more poetry. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Like I said, Katie can't be here tonight, but she'll definitely be back next week. And we definitely will miss her, but we'll do our best to have the prompt lines. And this week's prompt, once again, was it's right here, write a poem which confesses something that's secretly seasonal to you, but not so much to others. That was your prompt for this week. And let's see what Katie had. So Katie usually posts her poem in the evening now on Monday afternoon or so on her YouTube or Facebook and X. So you can follow her there. Find Katie Dozier. And she already posted this. This is Secret Admirer. And let's give it a read here. Secret Admirer. Sometimes I twirl a finger to write in nature's things, snow and sand and dust. Each sticks to my forefinger, which I then wand away, writing I love you, as if written by the rain. I leave this lost feather message right beside the post office bell, and on vacation by a half-sunk sandcastle, builders busy jumping in waves out in the sea. Today, behind the grocery store, I picked a stranger's dented car. I found it's not impossible to love every grain of pollen, at least from afar. And yeah, a really cool poem by Katie. That was when Katie Dozier with Secret Admirer, and really nothing encapsulates her persona, her personality more than that act of dropping little secret love all around the world. So really cool poem there, Katie. Thanks for sharing it. And mine is this. It's called Spring Melt. It took a long time to think of something that fit like the secret seasonal thing. I don't know. That was and then I thought of something. So here we go. This is Spring Melt. Slip even the tip of a finger into icy water, and my whole elbow is back in the bucket that we kept on the end of the bench, not straining to feel and then not feel the strain of the flexor that's been twisted aflame by the torque of the body's kinetic chain, right foot driving from the rubber as the torso drops and the shoulder cocks to abduction, all that weight and momentum making a fulcrum of the cuff at the sleeve of the blade that the bone wheels against, the whole arm dragging its elbow like a whip that snaps at the moment of release, red thread of its seams absorbing even the force of the final touch again and again at the edge of breaking through the frayed strands of the innings until the whole biomechanical machine fell numb at the hip and was struggle. It was a struggle, even to lift over the lip of the orange plastic relief of the blocks of ice its submersion displaced, and the sound like something shattered but also smoothly slipping inside until the silence of their stillness burned with the heat of their cold into nothingness, every ounce of the arm vanishing like the days vanish overwhelmingly here and then gone. So that is my poem, Spring Melts. And that does take me back to spring baseball, all that, those sore arms. Let's see. So now let's see what everybody else has for us. And let's start with none other than Jeff Stumpo. I'm doing great, Jeff. Thanks so much for being here.
All right. I have a very, very brief poem because I took a crack at that form that Katie's been developing.
The Doji-ku. Yeah.
The Doji-ku, which I call it a Haiku with the do in brackets.
Oh, very nice. Okay.
So this is for our dog Cassie, who was 14 when we had to put her to sleep 2 falls ago.
Oh.
So it's just autumn's wet eye farewelling leaves. Autumn's wet eye farewelling our old dog leaves.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, great use of that form. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jeff.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was Jeff Stumpo with the Haiku, the Doji-ku. Very fun. Always inventive what Jeff's doing. And Jeff, of course, is going to be a guest coming up in a couple months when his new book comes out. Yeah, some people cheering in the audience right now, I see. Yeah, it's going to be exciting. All right, let's go next to Christiana Doucette.
Would you mind waiting just a minute? I'm having trouble with my computer, and I cannot get my Word file to load at the moment.
Oh, so no problem. Yeah, no problem. We'll be back.
Come back to me again, and I should have it up.
Okay. Let's go instead to Carla Schwartz.
Hi, you can hear me?
I can. Great to see you, Carla. A different location you're at. Yeah.
I am in a town hall in Lincoln, Massachusetts.
Oh wow, well, that's fun.
Yeah. So I have this poem, which I hope I can read. It's called My Season of Cold Water. When the pond is still frozen, covered in snow, it's hard to think about swimming there. But a few years ago, the 17th of March, a sunny 70-degree day, I had my first pond swim of the season, taking my time to dress head to toe in rubber, sweating grease with each piece of gear I squeezed into. The plunge, always a shock of cold, but then a calming when the water between my layers begins to warm. These cold water swims in spring are all about hope and expectation of more temperate water to come, waiting for ice out, fear and anticipation. That dates in 2 weeks, while today outside large snowflakes falling. Even a forecast, even with a forecast of rain tonight, I take comfort in the inches of white outside, that I might still have an extra month before I start my season of getting in front of what might otherwise swallow me. Sometimes I don't even bother with fins. I know I want to run out as fast as I can, but sometimes I just fall back into float, then stroke after stroke without the shock of freeze on my skin, my face, the only part of me unclothed. I look up to the sky. Eagle circling, the thermoclines, large fish flailing below.
Oh, I love that haiku at the end. I can definitely see why Katie chose that one for today, and really cool background story too in the verse part of the Haibin. Thanks so much for sharing that, Carla.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Yeah, it was Carla Schwartz from a town hall with My Season of Cold Water. Very cool. All right, next let's go back to Christiana Doucette. There she is.
Thank you for letting me be able to get that back together.
Yeah, no problem.
I don't know, my computer's just running
quick.
so slow.
Well, it definitely happens. Probably installing something in the background or whatever.
Probably. This poem was brought to you by planting about 80 dahlias this past weekend.
Oh, wow.
So I'll just jump right into it. It's called An Eye for It.
Great.
It's the season gardeners go to ground. There's a bucket set on the front step, and a slow-growing mound of tubers I've let wait all winter in the dead man's closet. Out comes each. I prod for rot, scan for gall, the safe deposit in bags. Some I've sawed in pieces, a scrap of an eye for each. Dahlias like the sun and well-drained garden beds. My daughters reach for the roots I've done, ask how a thin yam like this can blossom. It's like a poem just begun, planted in slow lines by thumb, catching the low hum of warmth and reaching for the surface, one thin word at a time. A sprout, a leaf, a pinched stem, new growth runs toward the sky and rhymes.
Yeah, very nice. I love that, one thin word at a time. So many great lines like there often are in your poems, Christiana. Thanks so much for sharing that. It was Christiana Doucette with An Eye for It. And next, let's go to a familiar face we haven't seen in a good long while, the legendary Zachary Honeycutt. Hey, Zachary. How you doing?
Hey, Tim. Hey, everybody. It's great to see you again and be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. We were starting to get a little worried. We hadn't seen you in such a long time. But we're glad to have you reemerge for another cameo.
Yeah. I was going to say, Tim, I wonder who I miss more, you or Katie. Since Katie's not here, I think I miss you just a little bit more.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, Katie's watching, though, so you got to be careful still.
Yeah. But
anyway,
okay,
so what do you have for us this week, Zach?
I brought a pantoum. Yes. A spring and winter pantoum. The ladybug, a pantoum. The spring that thaws what I thought died in me, while winter claws its paws to broken dirt. When I once thought I'm finally free, and the mousetrap in my heart no longer hurt, a winter claws its paws to me, and springs out in secret, unexpected ways. And the mousetrap in my heart retains my hurt, and recolors mauve spring to winter grays. My spring is secret, not the ladybug, though I saw her in my office and took her outside to winter grays and mauve spring, where she crawled, then flew far away with zing. It would have been selfish to keep her there, in my office where the sunlight grins, outside windows she can't zing past or fare, and skip that hollow trap for little sins. To her, my office would be prison, not probation, and I'd be the poorest guard. So this spring I hollowed out my indecision and let it spring forth like a rushing river, hard. And even though winter's probation melts and winter's whiskers fall and dry away, and this spring rushes thoughts of you, I knew I had to let you go, though I miss you today.
Oh, beautiful rhyme slowing that home. That was the ladybug, a pantoum. And, Zach, we don't have the one-page limit anymore. You used to get so much trouble and bend into such contortions trying to get it onto one page. Now you don't even have to worry about it.
Are you serious? Are you serious?
That is true. I mean, if it's a 10-page poem, it better be great or else Katie's not going to pick it. But, we're going to have a variety and there's really no limit. So,
oh man, I am so pumped. I had no idea. I did not know that.
Well, that is the plus side of having it filtered in this way is that we open up more time for longer poems, more variety. So we're not all stuck in that one box, but yeah. So,
I just wanted to say really quick though, I had a really rough couple of months. I was actually hospitalized twice.
Oh,
I have a mental condition, and I won't really say what it is, but when it gets to the point where it gets out of control and it got so severe that I couldn't take it, I had to get treatment. And so I've been getting therapy now, and I've been on some medication, and I'm actually feeling a lot better. I'm in the recovery stage, but for a long time I stopped writing and I felt like I couldn't even write a poem or anything. And it was horrible. I was in like a really dark place, but I'm just really happy to be back on the show with you guys. So just wanted to say hey to all of you.
Well, we're definitely all really happy to have you back, Zach. And I definitely understand, what that's like, having, grown up the way I did and worked as a counselor too. And really appreciate that. And it happens sometimes, but it's so great to see you back and getting back up on life, on top of things. So thanks for being here, Zach.
Yeah, well, thank you, Tim. See you guys soon.
Yep, see you later. Zachary Honeycutt with the Ladybug, a pantoum. Now let's go next to a first-time caller, Nora Ron. HarperCollins is here.
Oh, yeah. I forgot to change that. I am actually at the book fair in London right now, though.
Oh, wow. That's exciting. The book
Yes.
fair in London.
Yes.
That's
So,
really cool. I imagine, I don't know much about that, but I imagine it's huge, a book fair in London. Is that right?
it's pretty big. We stay at our booth and everybody comes and we have our little meetings. But yeah, it's a pretty big affair.
Ah, well, very cool. Well, let's see. Where are you usually based out of?
I'm usually in Baltimore, or New York, where I live.
Uh-huh. Well, very cool. Well, let's hear what you have to share for us tonight.
Yes, from then to now. The path to the allotment runs just down the road, across the zebra crossing, cars careening down the blind slope of the curving hill, through the unremarkable fenced gate next to the school. Blunt lock, rusting chain links, and fallen leaves. But this is by appearances only, merely the physical distance. Life is like this. What begins as a buried seed under the gray English sky germinates, comes green and twining into the world. Who knows what distances you have traveled to be here? What span of time, what epochs past? A striped rental chair in a London park, a fallen tray in the cafeteria line. The slugs will come later for the strawberries in summer when the bees are busy in the orchard, each plot patterned after its master, tidy or untended, productive or decorative, fallow or fertile. But now nothing grows, only the early blossoms of a hedge. Head down the bamboo tunnel after the blonde head of the almost fairy child, tween in the pink jacket, picking her way over the roots, inviting you along. Worms turn the soil and another spring arrives. A snail crawls across a leaf. Each calendar year has its traditions, its quiet anniversaries remarked, and here is one, the allotment visit, the compost delivered, something usable from the muck, quiet miracle of midlife.
I love that ending and the energy of the poem too, through all those details. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely a pleasure. Hope you come back soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was Nora Ron with From Then to Now, live from the London Book Fair. We got a lot of people on location places tonight. That's really fun. All right, now let's go next to Jared Campbell.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, great to see you, Jared.
Good to see you. So what I was thinking about, one of the things that I like about securities law and corporate governance work
One of
is
the
that
things.
one of the things is that it's very cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things that you have to do on a quarterly basis or on an annual basis. So there's actually a seasonality to the kind of work that you end up doing. You end up doing a lot of similar kind of work at the same time of year. So I did Rondo. Long-term incentive plans should utilize relative performance metrics, and daisy chains don't count. It's proxy season, and the meadows are green and rich as NEOs. Now, item 402, you'll see galumphing like a bumblebee, extracting wealth from every rose. The daffodils wear board slate clothes. It's like the say on pay vote grows from every blooming cherry tree. It's proxy season. Glass Lewis says the plan proposal, like the burbling creek, imposes such dilution it should be opposed. For item 403, count dandelion fluff. It knows it's proxy season.
A really cool, intricate poem there. And I can definitely relate to that too. Like living in LA, the thing that I hated the most about it before we moved to the mountains, there was no sense of season, and just having that one continuous summer like it felt there, it was just maddening to me. It was like 3 years. It felt like one, and I did not like it. And now the nice thing about Rattle too is I get these cycles too that we have, the different contests we do certain times a year, certain things. Right now, of course, the tax season, which is the worst, but there are seasons here too, and I definitely appreciate that poem. Really cool details. Thanks for sharing that, Jared.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, it was Jared Campbell with Rondeau. Long-term incentive plans should utilize relative performance metrics, and daisy chains don't count. Fun as always from Jared. Let's go next to. Oh, hang on a second. I gotta fix something that I broke. Hang on. What did I do here? Okay. Okay, there we go. Next up, let's go to Laura Buxbaum.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. Great to see you, Laura.
Good to be here. This is exciting. It's my first time. Also, I don't know that I would ever try my hand at a rondo. That seems really challenging to me. Well done.
Definitely is. Yeah, and you're around so much in the comments and things. I thought you'd been on before, so it's cool. Welcome for the first time.
No.
Where are you calling from?
No, thank you. Well, I'm in Florida. I'm on vacation. Normally I'm in Maine, but I'm in a hotel room, which is why I have this blank wall behind me, on Marathon Key. Anyway. This is called Thanksgiving Eve.
Great.
Come home with me, you said, as we danced to rock and roll at the American Legion after several Budweisers because it was that or Miller Lite. And who drinks that piss? But I said, no, no, I don't do that anymore. And anyway, I have to be up at 5 to put the turkey in the oven. So it will be almost done when I leave for our family Thanksgiving an hour away. I mean, you're kind of sweet, and I like how you sing and play mandolin, but really that's a bad idea. Well, I'll just tell my friend, and what's your number in case I don't come home and they need to come looking? Promise you'll get me home by 5? Oh, that day. Turkey barely done, still smelling you on my skin, a sleepy grin I couldn't wipe off my face. So long ago, and we still dance, still celebrate our secret anniversary.
Oh, I love the secret anniversary and the voice in that. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Laura. Yeah.
Thank you. True story.
Yeah, well, that's great. And enjoy the rest of your vacation. Yeah, that was Laura Buxbaum with Thanksgiving Eve. And next, let's go to another first-time caller, Matthew Scoggins.
Hi, Tim. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah. It's great to see you. Where are you calling from?
From San Diego, California.
Excellent. Yeah, I love San Diego.
So I can relate to the lack of seasons you were just talking about.
Definitely, yeah. Although the weather is so nice there that you can't really complain.
Yeah. Okay, my poem is titled Christmas Leave.
Okay.
I pull my face away from the top of my daughter's head. From my lips, the fine, curly locks velcroed to my chin. She's been having trouble sleeping, fighting against the time change that comes from flying across the country for the holidays. I try not to disturb her, but my neck just will not stop itching. My skin's not accustomed to this growing scruff, this new low-pile carpet stapled to my face. But this scruff is my small 2-week rebellion, a striving against the military regulations that remove my full autonomy. Who cares if shaving on leave isn't something that's enforced? I still feel like a rebel, role-playing the face I might have as a civilian if I ever muster the courage to separate from the Navy.
Oh, that's a really cool detail to be the focus of a poem. Yeah, Christmas Leave. I think great use of the prompt for coming up with something like that. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, that was Matthew Scoggins with Christmas Leave. And next, let's go to Brian O'Sullivan.
Tim.
Hey, Brian, great to see you.
Hey, great to see you. Great night. I have a Haiku. It has the unfun topic of the seasonality of suicide. So sorry for coming up on the end with a sad topic. But here we go. It's called Waste. On that April with his shower sutta, bathes everyone with that honeyed Chaucerian liqueur. All the world turns to thoughts of lights receding in yawning tunnel, cloud-flecked twilight. Suicide. In an emergency room 30-odd years ago in early May, I learned that spring is suicide season. I was surprised to hear that I'd done the trendy thing for once. Recently, I read that psychiatrists say it's because all kinds of inflammation, even seasonal allergies, aggravate depression. Tumbling in the hay, serotonin. But I still believe it's because of Pandora's last bane and only gift, the scrawny singer with broken wings stuck to the bottom of the jar, starting to sing again, starting to peel itself away, having been rushed a little too fast by birdsong and sycamore scent into invoking thoughts of brilliant days before it's strong enough to convince us that those thoughts can be true. This germ of hope gives a tiny jolt it takes to down the pills or pick up the razor blade and say yes to the final no. Because we wake from our somnolence just enough to see the wild parade of leaf and critter mocking our decay, and not yet enough to hear it calling us to join. Because shoots strain against the weight of muddy soil as they grow. Because breaking ice jackknifes between heartbeat and wait.
Well, really, really moving poem, Brian. Thanks so much for writing and sharing that. That's really, really profound stuff. 2 weeks in a row with some really moving poems, and that's a really detail. I didn't know that about spring either, so that's really interesting. On top of it,
yeah, I found it to be a really surprising detail too.
Yeah, definitely, and I've got the allergies myself right now, so I'm trying to
hang in there.
hit the mute button. But yeah, I can really too. Thanks so much for sharing that, Brian.
Thank you.
Yeah, Brian O'Sullivan with Waste. And last but not least, we're going to have a poem by Ted Bernal Guevara, who was invited to the prompt lines. Ted, unable to join because of a health condition, but he has got Bachelor Abroad with us. And Ted, of course, from South Carolina. And did he say anything? He says, well, I don't want to give the poem away, so let's just read the poem. This is Bachelor Abroad. Here we go. Bachelor Abroad. He borrows a stapler from the hotel desk. No one knows but the third button of his favorite polo is stapled from the inside. Not the least the blonde bartender, whom he had to explain to that saying, "I am in love with you," is miles away from "I love you." In between are the many layovers, grounded like the Jewish girl at Kohl's who is going to the local prestigious college, or the mother of two at the DMV getting her chauffeur's license. I love you don't care about goals or status or age or survival. All the companionship he needs are like the portable protein packs he had stuffed in his carry-on. But he is a romantic. As long as she's game, the blonde bartender's scheduled hours are their interactions. Personal dating, if you will. And when it's time to leave, he feels the emptiness, the unplanned part of his trip, the notion of impossible he puts on like sunglasses. She's just my getaway, he thinks. But the moment he lands home, he's flipping through the calendar till he flies again. All these months he pretends he could live through. Oh, really wonderful ending. And I love that the notion of impossible he puts on like sunglasses. Yeah, great poem, Ted. Thanks so much for sharing that. It's Ted Bernal Guevara with Bachelor Abroad. And that's going to wrap up the prompt lines for tonight. Thanks, everybody, for joining and for writing poems. Of course, if you have a poem for that prompt, which was, once again, to write a poem which confesses something that's secretly seasonal to you, but not so much to others, you can still submit that up until the end of the month for consideration as the prompt poem of the month. And, of course, Katie also considers poems for regular publication in Rattle. Their new issue of Rattle just came out, and there's a few poems from the prompt lines in that issue as well, like there has been in every issue lately. So don't hesitate to send your poems in, even if you didn't get them in time for reading on the show today. All right, now let's go to the haiku to close out the show. And Katie's got one of her Doji. Let's check it out. And this, here we go. Another dead deer poem. And so, another poem, another dead deer poem. And the brackets there around that dead deer in that new format Katie's working on. And I think that was probably inspired by the recent episode of the Critique of the Week, where we talked about how there's so damn many dead deer poems, among other things. Also the homeless poem. And really great use of the haiku there, Katie. And mine, now we went to, the reason why we had no Critique of the Week on Friday this week is because we went to Boston to visit Rena Espaillat for a feature coming up, another still life. Katie took photographs like she did in the current issue. If you've got that issue, subscribers, there's that wonderful section of photos to go along with Ted Kuzer's poems. We're going to do the same thing with Rena for the summer issue coming up. We just did the photo shoot there. And one of the things about Rena is she's got this sunroom in the back with this wonderful garden. And she insisted taking a whole bunch of cuttings and explained about how so many of her plans in that garden came from cuttings themselves. And so this inspired this haiku: abundance, all the plants grown from cuttings. Abundance, all the plants grown from cuttings. That is the haiku for this week. That is the show for this week. Now, next week's prompt from Katie for the prompt lines is going to be this. Write a poem about a time you couldn't keep the correct time straight. Include at least one temporal shift. That's the prompt for this week. Perfect as we exit out of daylight savings time. Or no, enter into daylight savings time. I can't keep it straight, which is part of the point. Also really funny that in the kitchen, our little Katie moved the clock forward. Then I didn't realize she already had, so I moved the clock forward too. And we were working 2 hours forward for a little while. Very confused on Sunday, which might have been the inspiration for that prompt. Anyway, that is the prompt for next week. Write a poem about a time you couldn't keep the correct time straight. Include at least one temporal shift. That's your prompt next week. And the guest next week is going to be Lisa Wells. Now, Lisa is another Rattle Poetry Prize finalist from last year, from that issue number 90. She's got a book that just won the Larry Levis Award, I believe, The Fire Passage. And we're moving through some of these poets now from that winter issue who were finalists. And I think Lisa's got several books out. This one was selected by Dan Seuss, actually, too. I saw that today. So I'm really looking forward to reading The Fire Passage and talking to Lisa Wells next week on the Rattlecast with also your poems about where you can't keep the time straight. That's episode number 334 coming up next Monday, March 16th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week. In the meantime, we'll talk to you later. Good night.